Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and tonight I wanted to talk about socialism, about pros and cons. Okay, this might sound a little bit strange, and of course, immediately at the start of this video, I have to say that socialism is responsible for death of millions and millions and millions of people. There were a lot of people who died during hunger, there were a lot of people who died in China during the so-called Cultural Revolution, and so on and so on. At the same time, one could also look, for example, at liberalism. There were such a things that several million people died in India when Churchill was in power, and as you probably know, there are not so many Indians in USA as it used to be before. Have you wondered why? Well, most of them were extincted, basically killed off by the America, while Democrats or Republicans or similar parties were in government. So basically, they were governed by democracy and liberalism, and a lot of people, millions of them, ended up dead. So, as you can see, you can pretty much find this type of argument about any ideology, and you could also argue that, for example, France, which participated in slave trade, Belgium, that used to cut off people's arms just about 100 years ago because they didn't gather enough natural rubber, or a lot of killings that was going on with Portuguese colonial power, and it's not further away than just 70, so it's like 50 years ago. So we can find practically every sort of ism, any kind of ideology that was in power, that has committed some horrible, horrible atrocities, or if you want, horrible mistakes. So, for example, such thing as freedom of speech. I love freedom of speech. That's one of the things which I really enjoy in life, and I like to share my opinion and my view of things. And when it comes to socialism or harsh forms of it, if you speak out in something that is against government in some shape or form, you will end up in jail. So, if I would have lived during the times of sort of communism slash socialism, it is very likely that I would have been sitting in jail by now. Hmm, not a nice thing. So, ladies and gentlemen, to illustrate this, I drew up a very, very simple scheme. And as you can see here, I made liberal values, liberal society, and here is freedom of speech. And here is socialism or social, as I shortened it, and you go to jail for speaking out free. But I bet that this negative stuff about socialism is pretty obvious, and you've heard about it about a million times before. But what could possibly be good about it? Well, we have to say that in Europe, for 50 years, when there was domination of socialism in East Europe, there was no war. Yes, there were uprising like Prague Spring 68. There was uprising in Hungary, I think it was somewhere 58, 59, and there was a couple of incidents in former DDR. But all of those uprisings combined, the number of casualties is not even 1% compared to what happened during so-called Yugoslav wars. So in my little tiny scheme here, I wrote down the next line, and that is that socialism during that time in Eastern Europe, no war, and after it switched to liberal, it was pretty much immediately war. So, as you probably guessed by now, that in this scheme, the next part will be negative about a socialism. Well, in a very degree, of course, but mainly one could say that there was no foreign travel during socialism. So most of people who lived in USSR during that time have not been allowed to go outside. There were a little bit less restrictions for people who lived in Czechoslovakia. The way I understand this, they were able to travel about once in 5 years to Western countries, and they could move freely in the so-called East Bloc. And for people of Yugoslavia, there was pretty much free movement, especially if you would get a job outside of your country. But for most of people, vast amount of people in Europe who were living on the east side, basically Soviet Union citizens, there was no movement outside the country. So traveling abroad. Well, most of people in countries like, let's say, Russia, China, United States, even Canada, they very rarely go abroad. They are mainly inside their own country, and they're quite happy with that. But for me, traveling abroad is extremely important. It's like the air I breathe. For me, it's one of the most essential things I live for. To be able to go to other countries, to experience it, to get a new picture, to get a more energy, fresh start. Every time I'm on the bridge between Denmark and Sweden, I feel like almost there is like lift up, like my car lifts me up a little bit above the bridge, and I'm just slowly kind of easing, almost feeling like is as if I were flying. It's wonderful. It's very hard to find something to compare it to. It's this ultimate sense of freedom, and some people might say, "Oh no, you're exaggerating it." No, I feel it every time I travel across this wonderful bridge, and it has been especially accentuated because there were some restrictions in my life for a short time during COVID, and it felt really horrible during those couple of weeks, and now I missed it even more. So it's very, very sort of emergency type of situation. I want to travel, I miss it bad, and it's very essential for me in my life. But then again, many people have no problem with it. They don't have this need to be traveling abroad. It's simply not important for them. That's life. We're all different. The next one, as you will probably see, is a little bit of double-edged sword, religion. For some time in Soviet Union, religion was more or less forbidden, banned, or whatever you want to call that. And even after the Second World War, when it was a little bit softer on it, there were still some clear restrictions on it, and by no means did it have a place in sort of public life. So it was definitely some harsh decisions based on that, and there were people who were working with church who were also killed in the pre-Second World War part. On the other hand, one has to say that there was also no religious fanatism. Like, for example, quite a lot of wars had that element in them. Both on Christian and on the Muslim side, there was a very um, horrible use of the religion to incite hate and things like that. So, as I said, it's a double-edged sword, so it's a both good and bad that there was no religion in socialism. Now, one more thing that will be probably the last because I could make this list to go on and go on, but I'm gonna do one last thing. Moving permanently to live somewhere, it was very, very difficult in East Europe, and in Soviet Union you even had to go to authorities to move from city to city. There was a certain system where you had to write yourself in, at least in Moscow, and you couldn't move away from Soviet Union at all unless you were Jewish to go to Israel, or if you had a marriage or something very exceptional like that. So I think it's a horrible thing. I think it was one of the main failures of the late years of East European socialism, because all the people who were dismayed, disappointed, unhappy about the socialism, they couldn't go away. And I guess they kind of dig their own grave that way. On the other hand, one has to say that there were clearly some plus sides from this restricted amount of movement, because there was practically no unemployment to talk about. As soon as you would get out of like your college or university, you would be more or less handed in your job. And secondly, because people were not moving freely, there were very little things in terms of open ethnical tensions, like people didn't call each other names, or at least if you would do that in public, there could be some very, very severe consequences for that. So it was very little also like migration. So the tensions that could be associated with migration were also very, very low. So, yeah, that's your restriction on moving, but a bit of its positive side. Oh, and just a couple of things before I forget. When it comes to business, of course, business was completely impossible in like Soviet Union, or you could do it in some East European countries on a very, very little scale. There would be some sort of farmers market, and you could sell your own produce, but I'm not sure that you could even call it business. Just some small, small agricultural stuff. So it was definitely loss of opportunity. Your opportunities to do something yourself were pretty much zero, and a lot of people felt locked in. They didn't have a freedom to do something about it themselves. And one more thing, one could clearly describe it as a life or death. So, for example, the number of people who were dying during the late years of socialism was way fewer than the ones that came after that. So, after 1990, there was a huge wave of death because there were a lot of people who started to get unemployed, a lot of criminal problems, a lot of drug problems, a lot of problems with alcohol, and there was a huge, massive wave of death. And the life expectancy dropped off horribly, terribly, in some places almost by a decade. And the other side of the spectrum, where people were born to life, so basically birth has gone down dramatically, and there were some communes, some places where in a year you would have like one baby or so. So it was absolutely unbelievable time when the fertility dropped hugely. So, considering this very large amount of people dying unexpectedly and much earlier, and also very, very low figures of nativity, it was millions and millions of people who didn't get born at all or finished their life very, very early on. So, yeah, one could say that for millions of people, converting to liberal values literally meant death. And I think it's very interesting that in most Western countries we can't even talk about that. Well, I guess I can. We'll see what will happen to me after this video, right? So let's go over quickly on what we got on our list. So the liberalism consequences, it was free speech, there was war, there was travel allowed, there was religion allowed, there was free movement, unemployment came about, free migration, but at the same time, migration problems arose, and free business also, which brought as consequences of it early death for lots of people and not many children getting born, not many new people coming to life. On socialism, there was jail for free speech. There was practically no war. There was practically no travel, at least outside your own country. There was very little to no religion at all. There was no freedom of movement. The job security was more or less 100%. There was no migration and also no migration problems associated with it. There was no freedom of business and no possibility to affect your life in that way. But there was also a lot of life because nobody was dying from things like wars or premature death from unemployment and inducing alcoholism, drug problems, and so on. So, what could I say? I don't, knock on wood, Toitreet. So, I don't have problems with alcohol consumptions. I don't have any problems with drugs. I'm not unemployed. And I would say I'm socially okay. Also, for me, such things like I mentioned in this video as freedom of movement, freedom of travel, and of course, free speech are extremely important. So, for me personally, I would say that, yeah, I guess, being egoistic, I would say that liberalism for me would be definitely an optimal choice. On the other hand, I think that this short video and this equation, it sort of makes one think that there are some people who value things differently, and for quite a lot of them, they could not escape war, and they could not find job in the new reality of liberalism. Also, for quite many of them, it literally meant death because they couldn't survive in the new system, in the new economic system. Some of them succumbed to, alcoholism, criminality, and things like that. So there are some problems with liberalism and things associated with that. This choice, which for me personally is very clear, for some people might not be as clear as it is for me. And even I can see that there are some good and bad things on both sides. So if you watch this video so far, please let me know what you think about it. Hope to hear from you in the comments. Okay, put the thumbs up on this video. Bye.